now, with highest ever ratings for a news show on politics and topical issues for the day. His one-line zingers, "The nation wants to know," have made him a true legend. His fans and detractors have come to respect him for speaking his mind relentlessly, fearlessly, and unapologetically. His energy and passion for his work is as much a visual treat as his list of guests on the show. Please join me in welcoming the extraordinary journalist, Mr. Arnab Goswami. He's here. Please. Yes. He's here today to share his thoughts on opinion-driven journalism and why he believes India's media is the best. Ladies and gentlemen, Arnab
In 2017, this country will have an independent media, and that independent media will be republic. Will you back republic when we independently say that we are answerable to nothing and nobody but only
3, 2, 1.
Thank you, everyone, and good morning. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And it's great to be in Singapore. Raj, thank you for inviting me. And thank you for putting up with the early slot, because I'm going to take a flight right after this. But it's wonderful to be with all of you in beautiful Singapore. And it's a bit of a risk to invite me on stage and not give me a time limit. And so it's what I call self-inflicted injury in case I overshoot. Lord Meghnad Desai has been a guest on my shows very often. And he knows the average length of my question is about 10 times his answer. And his complaint always has been that before I say the second word, you ask me the second question. It's just bad habit, Lord Desai. So you know how dangerous this can get. But being brief is not my style. But I'm going to try my best. First of all, I love the introduction. I love the name that you've given to your conference, Ashwamedh. Conquering in the absence of any other challenge. And I think India's time is now. And 2017 is a year of inflection. What we saw happening last month on the 8th of November, and what has happened after that is a churn. It's a dialogue. It's a discussion. But it's also that one word which everyone seeks. It's disruptive. It's broken the paradigm. It's made people think. Earlier they used to say one thing about India is that things never seem to move. Things never seem to change. And things, when they change, don't change fast enough. And now they say about India that things are changing too fast. Where was the warning? Why didn't he tell people well enough in time? How many people did he include? Exactly the opposite to what I heard here. In this very convention center, 3 years back when I came, the conversation point was we wish we had a leader and we wish we had a country where things would change overnight on the basis of the gut instinct that India can be great. Today, there are a lot of people who turn around and say, things are changing too fast. We are worried we are not going to be a democracy anymore, and I hear such things. So before I begin, let me just put this fact in context. What is the nature of change we want in India? And as a country, can we afford to wait? And if we want to wait, how long do we wait before the big disruption happens? So as many of you may know, over the last sort of 64 days or so, I am on a very exciting journey launching my independent news venture in India, which is called Republic. And I'm proud to say that Republic will be India's first independent news venture, owned, run, and controlled by content professionals. And we envision that it will also be India's first step into global journalism. But today I want to give you a ringside view, because what happens in India economically and politically, what is happening today, what has happened over the last 2.5 years of the Modi government, will sculpt the next 2.5 and then the next 5 and 10 after that. Before I get into brass tacks, point by point, I think it's important to contextualize the India that we are talking about. India is today located on a development trajectory that is classified as an emerging market. And I think it's important to point out that even with a central government which is set to hold a conservative worldview, given the fact that we feel that Modi comes from an RSS background, his roots are in Nagpur, his economic point of view will be conservative. Even with that, India grew at 7.6% in 2016. In fact, despite demonetization, and we are yet to truly assess what the impact of demonetization will be, there are reports stating that despite the negative IMF forecast for 2016 and 17, India is likely to grow much faster than China in 2017 and 2018, and by quite a margin. This is very important for us to do a SWOT analysis of this. In 2016, IMF estimated China to grow at 6.7%, which is 1% higher than that of India. In 2017, they see India at 7.2%, as opposed to China at 6.5%. Now, what happens to that gap going forward, 2019, 2020, is that this gap goes even wider in 2018. So let's go to 2018. IMF projects India growing at 7.7 to 7.8%. And China is growing only at 6% by 2018. So let's be clear about the context. At the outset, therefore, I would say to you that it's important for us to realize that the present administration in India has taken up the challenge to keep India on the growth trajectory despite being largely uncompromising in making tough policy decisions, which in itself are a breakaway in terms of thinking and economic policy philosophy in India over the last decade or so. You see, in India, politics does not drive policy anymore. Politics does not drive policy in India anymore. Politics is rightly a subset of politics under this administration, which gives people like me a lot of hope. Now, with this broad introduction in mind, let me go into a few specific points on what is happening in India now and what we should read as a trend for the future. My first point is on demonetization and what I think is likely to happen next. I remember as I ran into the studio on that tip-off, and it was about 8 o'clock in the evening, and nobody knew what was going on because they said the Prime Minister is going to meet the President at 6:45, and strategically at 7:20, they released pictures of Prime Minister Modi meeting the 3 service chiefs, Army, Navy and Air Force. And in the context of what had been happening vis-a-vis Pakistan 2 months earlier, most of us were completely misled by the government once again. And we began to call all the security experts of the world into the studio at 8 o'clock, thinking that the Prime Minister has done the inevitable, a second round of surgical strikes on Pakistan must have happened, and this is all that we're going to be the breaking news at 8 o'clock. But when he made that announcement, and when he spoke about what he was doing, 100 different thoughts gushed into my head. Was it going to be a geopolitical shift in strategy? Was it going to be a big economic policy announcement? Was it going to be an announcement that entailed a military response to Pakistan, a second round of surgical strikes? We had no inkling to the announcement. And that is a big thing in an extremely leaky system in Delhi. For us to have absolutely no inkling of what's going on in the Prime Minister's office is itself quite exceptional. And I want to make 4 straightforward points in the context of demonetization to give you a sense of the thinking of the present-day political administration in India and what I think the road ahead is going to be. Point number 1. This is a carefully thought-out strategy to ensure that the economy is flush with clean cash. Let me elaborate. While the complaint within India, and sometimes outside India, I heard this in Singapore as well, is that it happened all too suddenly, with the Prime Minister making the announcement at 8 p.m. that all the old 500 and 1,000 rupee notes will turn to paper at the stroke of midnight. The fact is that the clinical and carefully crafted thought in the lead up to demonetization, in my view, is an indication of a political leadership that is mature enough to work on the long-term thinking rather than short-term results. It is our fault that we didn't read the signals, because we, and I include a lot of people in the media, have become too status quoist in our thinking. We are status quoist, our leadership is no longer status quoist. We're used to the Manmohan Singh UPA 1, UPA 2 era style of functioning with the bureaucracy, with the Ministry of External Affairs. We are not used to disruptive thinking that happens in the PMO. So we didn't see the signals. Now, what were the signals? On the 28th of August 2014, the government rolled out the Jan Dhan Yojana, the first financial inclusion scheme, which was the first indication of the administration urging a transition to encourage saving in bank accounts instead of keeping large or small or medium amounts of money of cash at home. A lot of people in India criticized the Jan Dhan Yojana, saying that bank accounts have been opened, but the poor people in India have not been given any money to put into those accounts. On November 8th, the answer as to why open bank accounts if you don't have money in them came. And the message was loud and clear. You are urging the poor to open bank accounts all the way back in 2014. In my view, that was the first step. The second step, the big one, was in November 5th, 2015, when almost a year before making the demonetization announcement, the Prime Minister made 3 big gold-related schemes, which was the gold monetization scheme, the sovereign gold bond scheme, and the gold coin and bullion scheme. Now, what was the strategy there? The strategy was, let us prepare the people, because we know the sentimental value of gold, the emotional value of gold in the Indian population. Let us prepare the people and the Indian economy to deal with the short-term instability by taking their 20,000 tons of gold and putting it to productive use. Why I'm making these points is that so you see yourself in your own minds a chart, a polynomial, a graph of one event leading to the other. And if we have not seen the signals despite that, then it is our fault. Not the fault of the government. The government was indicating what it was going to do on November 8th for the last 2.5 years. But we, status quoist as we are, have not yet come to terms with our own political leadership and the change in style, because we are used to the 1990s style. Now in 2016, while 2014 and 15 were periods in which the administration was structurally trying to put in place structural changes which will aid the common man for demonetization, I think 2016 was the most important year, because in 2016 we started to see a dramatic push for cracking down on black money and unaccounted for wealth. On June 1st last year, the government gave an opportunity to all those people who had not disclosed their incomes or paid their taxes to come forth and make their declarations. Looking back, in my view, this was possibly, by this time the Prime Minister had made up his mind. This was possibly structurally a final warning to those people with dirty cash that come forth and declare. The opposition was cynical about the scheme, saying it was virtually giving a clean sheet to those who had violated the law. But then again in November, the rationality of it came through. On 27th of June, 2016, I had a 1.5-hour interview with the Prime Minister. And believe me, even I could not see the signals. Nobody could see the signals. Last night at dinner, I shared with some the moment of epiphany when the Prime Minister at the end of my interview turned to the camera, and this was the only statement that was suo moto without a single question from me. Everything else, including Mr. Subramaniam Swamy and Raghuram Rajan, was a question and answer. The only time the Prime Minister turned around and looked at the camera, he waved his finger and he said, I will teach those people who don't declare their wealth, who have black money, how tough the law can be. And it was an unprepared response because the question was on Vijay Mallya and the answer shifted to something else. Yet even then, on the 27th of June, when Prime Minister sitting 2 feet away from me spoke about dirty money being linked to terrorism in the context of black money, and I'll tell you his quotes. He spoke about working in a direction to make sure that black money is not generated in India and black money doesn't go out of India. We still didn't read the signals. What was the headline people took in all the newspapers the next day after my interview? Modi wants Swamy. Or Modi's comment on Rajan. Nobody even considered, I'm sure many people in the room here probably just discounted that statement. You spoke about Modi on Pakistan, Modi on Swamy, but black money, I mean, we're a status quoist country. Who cares? Who thinks black money had become a slogan that was restricted to people like Baba Ramdev? It was not seen to be something that could really be tackled. Now think about it, how opaque we have become in our own thinking. And my entire contention is that we as a people, as an economy, as members of this economy, have not come to terms with a person called Narendra Modi. We cannot cope with a leader who wants to do something more disruptive than what we are used to. We believe everything will be an evolution on the kind of leaders we've had in India. I.K. Gujral, Deve Gowda, Vajpayee, very nice man, but not disruptive. And 10 years of Manmohan Singh, we become conditioned to being status quoist. Now think about the ultimate. 27th October, 17 days before the demonetization announcement, the Prime Minister gives the biggest hint. He says, and you look back at this and you say, what's wrong with it? He makes a speech in Vadodara. And in Vadodara he says, I warn you, I'm going to do surgical strikes on black money. In as many words, we still discount it. 7 days before the black money announcement, just 7 days to go, the Benami Transactions Prohibition Bill comes in, which was passed in August, comes into force. What does that do? That directly curbs black money in property transactions. We still don't see it. What we are not seeing today is a Prime Minister who works on a far more long-term strategy than we want to believe. People want to position Prime Minister Narendra Modi as a person who works on gut, who's not thought things out, who's too centralized. What we've not seen is that what Prime Minister Modi has implemented is the longest drawn-out strategy to weed out dirty cash from the system. A strategy which was so disruptive that even as per my sources, the very admired Raghuram Rajan refused to go along with it when the discussion happened in April 2016. I know Raghuram Rajan is very popular. Samshan should ask Raghuram Rajan, why did you oppose the demonetization scheme when it was brought before you in April 2016? It's one thing being fashionable. It's another thing being disruptive. Rajan is fashionable. Modi is disruptive. India doesn't need fashion. India needs disruption. And that's what Modi has done. So I believe what has happened is extremely telling in terms of the way this administration today in India thinks about implementation of policy. It is clinical, it is well thought out, and it is planned for a long term. The focus in India, therefore, and it is important for everyone, including long-term India players, to understand this, it is not short-sighted anymore. The second thing is that you have cheaper credit since banks have a greater flow of cash. I don't need to elaborate this in the room, but this is something that is already happening with even the SBI, very conservative, coming out and slashing interest rates by themselves. Looking forward, I know there's been a bit of sort of disappointment on this front, but I predict that in the next few months, interest rates will considerably fall in India going forward. So the thinking of this government today is to flush out the economic system of its excess baggage and make it as lean as possible. And not only has the implementation of demonetization been a long-term strategy of this government, but also the bold move was taken with a longer-term vision to move towards a lower interest regime, so that India becomes a more lucrative and attractive market for investors, so that the gap is less. In addition, moving towards a lower interest rate regime will also mean that the booming private sector is incentivized by way of creating an environment where there's more flexibility for taking out loans. The third is this issue about the impact on GDP in the short and long term. Now, I'm not an economist, and it is hard to say what the demonetization impact is going to be on GDP. But through my conversations and my analysis, I can tell you that the long-term story remains robust, even if there's a short-term deflationary trend. And I really think in this case, the deflationary trend will be much smaller than when we expect. And I'll tell you why. Because despite demonetization and the revision of GDP by several rate agencies to around 7%, that's the most conservative I've seen. It's not really gone down to 6%. Once money supply is restored, and that's a question of literally a few weeks from now, the population size will ensure a demand-led economic revival in this country. So I'm told that we can expect growth to recover gradually starting fourth quarter 2016-17, which we're already in, and in the first quarter of the consequent financial year, which means we are completely back on track in terms of the growth trajectory that we are on. So what you can expect in pure economic terms now is low interest rates, low cost of capital, increased investments, and a climate to support that, and a long-term increased GDP, which will set a virtuous cycle after a couple of quarters. Now let's look at the political impact and what this tells you about what's going to happen in the run-up to the next general elections of 2019. My information is that the advisors and agencies to the previous central governments had suggested demonetization of high currency notes on multiple occasions. But there was lack of political will given the mammoth political risk that this is seen to involve. In fact, if you look back, you will find that in 1971, the Vanchu Committee, in their interim report, had recommended demonetization of high-value currency notes. And I think the then finance minister was Y.B. Chavan. He took the proposition to Prime Minister Indira Gandhi in 1971. But the idea was nipped in the bud because of quote-unquote electoral considerations. And I think the amazing thing about what's happened now is that the general consensus in India is that the Prime Minister, if anyone has hurt his own core political base, the jewelers, the traders, the medium-level businessmen, the SMEs, in the process of demonetization by cutting off the cash economy. What does that reflect? It reflects an incredible degree of boldness and decision-making. And 45 years back in India, the political will was not exercised. 45 years later, it is being exercised. I think it's something to celebrate. What does it tell us in this room? It tells us the following: that demonetization came in the way that underscored a certain decisiveness and I think what is the chutzpah of the political leadership, given that it was a decision that was announced on the eve of a very, very crucial semi-final to 2019, which is the Uttar Pradesh and Punjab assembly elections. For a politician who's riding a massive wave of personal popularity, having carried out surgical strikes on Pakistan, knowing fully well that the Uttar Pradesh and Punjab assembly elections are like a semi-final right in the middle of his term, to the general elections to carry this out reflects a great deal of decisiveness and chutzpah. I don't think there would be any other political leadership anywhere in the world where a leader would have taken this level of risk. Secondly, demonetization. Irrespective of the prospects of returning back to economic normalcy in the first quarter of the next financial year, suppose it doesn't, will have huge consequences electorally on the 2019 general elections. And given that this government, I am told, will gain from it politically, given that demonetization has actually brought down inflation, which helps the poor in the short term, will bring down interest rates, which again helps the common man in the long term, all without compromising on long-term growth. So let's not make any mistake. Demonetization does not cripple Modi politically. Demonetization will strengthen Modi politically. It's a risk he takes with a 10% chance of it going horribly wrong. Most people wouldn't have taken the risk, he's taken the risk. You can expect India in 2017 is a country which has political stability, and most importantly, the political will to risk electoral outcomes. For India to grow as a country, you need a political risk-taking capital. Most change in India has not happened because politicians don't take risk. They link politics to economy. Tying these 4 points together, and based upon my immediate conversations with those closely in the know of the thinking in the government on what we can expect in terms of the road ahead post-demonetization, it's a move which is part of a larger plan to achieve the following. Cleanse the economy, bring on record from cash to monitorable digital transactions. This government is obsessed about monitorable digital transactions. You can say it's part of the Big Brother feel. I want to know what everyone's spending. But the long-term consequence of moving to a digital economy is tremendous for India. You use economic reform as a geopolitical weapon. You tell people, I am using it to fight terrorism. You broad-base the country's tax base as a collar of both digitization and flush it out of dirty cash. Then you risk a short-term political turbulence, which is substantially over for now to gain long-term objectives of growth and lower interest rates. You power through the squeeze in the economy. You create a squeeze in the economy. You power through it for a couple of quarters. But I am told that the decision makers factored in while taking the call to demonetization. You go forward with a different outlook that the homegrown demand backed by the demographic dividend will eventually ensure a quick bounce back. And finally, you have a significant thought-out plan to ensure that India moves to a lowering of tax rates, bringing down the cost of capital. Now you put all of this together. How is this anything but tremendously disruptive in the way they are thinking? We are thinking as a country. What impact does it have on the Indian population? Tremendous. What impact does it have on the political establishment? Tremendous. What impact does it have on the narrative in Indian politics? Tremendous. And what impact does it have on Modi politically? Prime Minister Modi now goes forward as a person who says, I took on black money. And in India, black money is equivalent to corruption. You've taken the core, what you call in Hindi, the Kendra Bindu, the fulcrum of the opposition's argument, and appropriated it for yourself. Now let's look forward. We are heading towards a budget. I've just taken some issues on demonetization. I now want to move to the issue of the budget. We are talking about India going forward. And I want to move to my second big point is what can people expect and what is the thought behind the 2017 budget. And I have a few points to make. We can take it forward in the conversation. The first year is the financial year changes. A big change in calendar is coming up in India. Union budget moves up to February 1st. The intent of the present administration is to ensure that the various departments and ministries get their funds in time in order to start spending by the next financial year. Moving up the budget is not just a symbolic thing. Moving up the budget date means that you can expect all legislative work completed before the beginning of the next fiscal, a fund flow right from the first quarter to various ministries. In terms of intent looking forward, please look at the changing of the budget date seriously. It means there is a degree of alacrity and efficiency which comes with this date, given that before March 24th, to get the budget passed by Parliament along with the appropriation bill and the finance bill, so we have all the implementations of all the proposals of the budget from day one of the next financial year. This is tremendous efficiency thrust into the economy. However, this move could be part of a larger plan to redefine what qualifies as a financial year in the first place in India. The biggest indicator of the change in budget date to be part of something larger is that the Shankaracharya panel has been set up to consider changes that can potentially redefine what qualifies as the financial year. So maybe we get to see even the calendar year in the future being qualified as the financial year. I think we are maybe 1 year away from that in India. And Modi makes big changes. The last big change I'm going to tell you at the end. I don't think Prime Minister Modi needs a panel to tell him what to do. This is probably a panel is a precursor to having taken a decision and doing the reverse engineering on it. I believe the report has already anyway been submitted to the Finance Ministry. And as per my sources, the committee has given reasoning for the changes and the impact on businesses, taxation system and procedures, statistics and data collection as well as agricultural crop periods. So depending on which way the government decides, I think one can expect to watch out for a change in the definition of the financial year, and the change in budget date could be a precursor for it. So we could have a complete merging of the calendar year and the financial year from 2018. The third and very important thing is this: getting away from this colonial legacies that the British left us with. Another thing which is called the railway budget. Nowhere in the world is there a railway budget. Tomorrow you'll have a bus budget and a tractor budget. It's only in India that you have a railway budget. This budget is going to be historical because for the first time since 1947, it breaks away from the colonial practice put in 1924. The British started the railway budget 93 years ago, of having separate railway and union budgets. This is a very big reform by the present administration. Sometimes, I don't know whether sitting in Singapore you see the kind of changes that are happening in India. But you tell someone in Delhi the railway budget has disappeared, for him it's a calamity. It's like the monsoon never happens. The merger of the railway budget and the union budget is part of a larger intent to facilitate beginning of public spending from April 1st. It's part of a plan. So going forward, we can expect the railways to save approximately 10,000 crores annually as per insider estimates because of this move. Beyond the symbolism of doing away with the colonial legacy going back to the East India Company, the merger of the union and railway budget serves the practical purpose of giving the railways the backing of the state's finances and saves the need to give dividend to the central government every year. So we have a really big reform coming that way. We talk about demonetization, we talk about a lot of things. These are the issues that are usually not talked about in India. The other big thing is doing away with plan and non-plan outlays. Traditional economic thinking in India being challenged by a political leader for the first time. My third point on budgetary indicators today before you is focused on a move to do away with planned and non-planned outlays, which is extremely symbolic given that it was a Nehruvian and socialist legacy which was carried on from year to year. But beyond being a symbolic break from a socialistic past, it is also extremely practical given that we will get all information on only capital and revenue outlays in the next budget. What can we therefore expect? We can expect not to carry the burden of the rigidity of plans which brought about it a throttling of innovations. We can expect a system which is not investing too much power at the center. We can expect a system in which the states are, for the first time in India, the states are free to plan for themselves rather than look to the center. So whereas the prescriptive political thinking is that there is an excessive amount of centralization in India, the realistic political thinking is that by moves such as doing away with plan and non-plan outlays, you've actually federalized India far more than previous Congress governments have. So overall, this move to do away with planned and non-planned outlays will bring with it a lot of energy at all levels of government. It makes the system truly federal in polity and economy. Going forward, you will see states competing with each other, thus bringing more transparency and ease of doing business. This, in fact, is already happening with traditionally laggard states in India, in the east, like Jharkhand, Bihar, and Bengal, holding business summits. And in the future, we can expect more competition between states to invite investment individually because of this structural change in budgetary allocations. This is hugely significant for India. And final point is on the coming of GST and its impact. GST is the biggest economic reform since the 90s. And I think its likely rollout almost certainly is the 1st of July. Given that the private sector is presently caught up in dealing with and adapting to the after effects of demonetization, there is likely to be a lot of learning and short-term uncertainty on their part, given that GST is not far away. And that is something both the administration and the private sector will be prepping for again, with the long-term vision of making India more investment-friendly to the world. These points, park it aside for your thinking. And then let's look at the bigger picture in India. What impedes India's growth? What has impeded India's growth over the last 50 years is the excessive amount of politics. We find politics in every aspect of our life. We see an excessive focus on indices like caste, religion, community, social strife, pulling India back as a country. Now, there's one massive reform which is going to come up, and I hope I'm not premature about it. But in my last 3 or 4 presentations, including one in this hotel 3 years back, I fairly carefully predicted some things which I think will happen in India. I think there will be a structural shift in 3 years to simultaneous elections in India for more stability and reform. What does this mean? India has approximately 15 elections between every general election. Given that each state is packed with one more, and there are major state level, municipal level elections, India is constantly in election mode. You watch Indian news channels, every 3 months there's an election. There's a mandate. And every election is like a mini general election. There is so much focus on elections in a multi-party system that sometimes it takes away from economic decision making and thinking. What is the consequence of having the Uttar Pradesh election 2 or 3 months after demonetization? The consequence of the election is that you will see whether the impact of demonetization affects Narendra Modi negatively. If the impact of demonetization does not affect Narendra Modi negatively, then I can confidently predict that 2019 is the last individual central election in India. 2024 will be the first simultaneous election in India. Now that's a very big change to happen 7 years from now. Which means 7 years from now, which means from 2019 to 2024, state elections will be bundled together. And 2024, all states and the center will go for one simultaneous election. Which means India for the first time will be yanked away from this entire business of being in perpetual election mode. The impact on politics and policy is that populism will take a little bit of a backseat. Deliverables will become more significant. Individual leaders and the kind of cult following of individual leaders will become more significant, which also means by consequence that the time will come for the Congress party to decide how long to latch on to Rahul Gandhi. But that apart, the larger consequence of simultaneous elections in India is huge. Use GST as an example. Using GST as an example, it is the collective will for inclusion in philosophy that has ensured that despite all the politicking that has happened in Parliament, and we all know how much politicking that has happened in Parliament, which parties like the Trinamool Congress, which have 7 or 8 MPs, almost holding the Indian Parliament to ransom, all the washout sessions that happened before it. We are just months away from the rollout of the biggest taxation reform. If the passing of the GST broadcast to the world one thing about the present administration, it was the will, political will to put reform ahead of every other political consideration. This country has only needed one thing: reform, reform, and reform. And it is this focus on reform that brings me to my final point before you today. As we look to predictions for 2017 and beyond, it is the likelihood of holding simultaneous elections. When I interviewed the Prime Minister in June last year, he spoke to me extensively on starting the debate on holding simultaneous elections because the mature Indian voter has transitioned to voting on performance as opposed to voting on vote banks. Going forward, we can predict 4 things rather importantly. 1, we will no longer have separate cycles for state and national elections. Secondly, as a result, we will no longer be putting the great country called India in perpetual election mode where governance comes to a standstill. Believe me, in India, before a UP election, usually governance comes to a standstill. Why UP? Even if there's an election in Goa or Assam, for 1 month before that, all you think about is caste considerations and elsewhere. And this is where the Indian media has done a greatest disservice to our country by focusing on the narrative set by politicians. Thirdly, we will not have a dual electoral process. A dual electoral process in India hampers long-term reform in legislation because of a simple thing. You see, they have 2 houses of parliament. A dual electoral process in India ensures what we call a balance of power of one house being maintained on another. What is the reality of that balance of power? The balance of power means that the Congress party may be wiped out and down to 25 or 30 seats tomorrow, but they will still maneuver through the upper house to restrict the will of the people in the lower house. How fair is that? How fair is it? How fair is it that in a country of 1.3 billion people, where for the first time in 50 years, you have a massive mandate of one government, a party that does not represent more than 7% of the lower house of parliament will impede every single economic reform in this country. Simultaneous elections is one prescription that takes us beyond that. The 4th thing is that we will not have a fractured political will and a hamstrung road for reform because one India, one election. One India, one country, one people, one election will mean that both the houses of parliament will speak in unison strongly to maximize reform rather than political considerations. As per the latest reports on this, and this is where it stands now, the Law Commission Chairman, again I'd say the Prime Minister does not need Commission reports, but in any case, the Law Commission Chairman has already said that holding simultaneous elections are possible during the 2019 general elections if a consensus is evolved with the stakeholders. The President of India is also supporting the idea of simultaneous elections. The Prime Minister is speaking for it on multiple occasions. I have a question here today. What if I am proven wrong? What if 2024 is not the first simultaneous election? What if 2019 is the first simultaneous election in India? Now, again, sitting in this room, I know 99% of people will say impossible, will not happen. But how many people, including Raghuram Rajan in April 2016, said demonetization in the calendar year 2016 is not possible? I'm saying factor in what you consider impossible in your thinking vis-a-vis India today. You may hear later in the day a lot of cynicism in this room. I'm not for cynics. I represent a younger aspirational India. I love disruption. I think politics has ruined my generation in this country. When we entered college, and let me tell you an anecdote, I entered college in 1990. And the first day you enter college, you enter a good college in Delhi. You get great marks. At that time, 90% was fantastic. And you feel great, and you're entering an elite college in Delhi. The first thing that you see on campus is the campus is on fire. Because the then Prime Minister of India brought the Mandal Commission report, introduced caste as a paradigm into India. And for the first time you realized you're not Arnab, you're Arnab Goswami. You are told that you are your caste. By your second year of college, and I'm adding this personal narrative so you understand where I come from. By the second year of college, one day you are driving from a movie hall called Chanakya, which was very famous in our time. And we used to wear bandanas, we were driving bikes. And we were stopped near Chandni Chowk. And you're told, where are you going? And you say, I watched the second show, and I'm coming back. They said, you should not go out, be driving on a bike today. And you say, why? They said, because the Babri Masjid mosque has been demolished. And large part of India is on the verge of a communal conflagration. So in the second year of college, you realize that the politicians have brought in the index of religion, caste and religion. Things which unfortunately we have not been able to break away from. Unfortunately in our country, our national media has fallen prey to the language and narrative set by politicians. We represent a new country. We want to break away from our thinking. We want to say that if the United States of America thinks about elections once every 5 years, unfortunately for the US, the hangover of the election will continue for the next 5 years, I think. I mean, it's almost embarrassing when I see CNN these days. We want to be a country that focuses on deliverables and dramatic change in thinking. I have focused on two parts today. Because we've always said to ourselves, what can make this country great? This country can be great if you have disruption in economic and political thinking. Demonetization is the greatest disruption in economic thinking. And long-term movement of India towards being a digital economy is something that should be welcomed with both hands. We should not narrow down our thinking to whether Modi will lose or gain UP. If Modi doesn't care about losing or gaining UP, why are so many people concerned about whether he will lose or gain UP? That's his concern. Simultaneous elections and the possibility of having simultaneous elections in 2019 or 2024 will mean that India, the Indian democratic experiment will truly be great for the first time, because what Indian democracy needs is not more elections, but fewer elections. And what is the result of it? You can concentrate on the larger picture of infrastructure and development. So as I close today, I want to tell you how absolutely optimistic I am of the India of today and tomorrow. And I think my words should carry a little bit more weight than others, because if you ask any Indian politician, including those from the present government, they will call me the prophet of doom. For those who have not watched me on television, we have never said one thing right about any politician. The only major quote-unquote scam of the previous government, as well as of this government, was broken by yours truly. In the middle of last year, one entire parliament session was a washout because of a story of alleged nepotism, favoritism that we broke within this government, where we questioned the nepotism and corruption of the Foreign Minister of India under Mr. Narendra Modi. So we are not here to get brownie points from any political party, certainly not the Congress or the BJP. But we must not lose sight of the bigger picture. The problem in India has been, finally, before I close, I'll tell you this. As a student of sociology, we used to learn about something called the Jajmani system, the patron-client relationship. In India, between the media of India, which is based in New Delhi, and the politicians of India, there has been a patron-client relationship. The media is pampered, taken on foreign tours, treated like gods, given 5-star treatment, so they can find 10 years of inefficiency, boredom, and corruption of a Congress government to be something that is steeped in the personal values of a person called Manmohan Singh. The media in India hides behind the visage of these ineffective leaders. Modi has broken that patron-client relationship. look at the bigger picture in India today. We are poised to overtake, we are certain to overtake, we are overtaking China in terms of percentage growth. There are short-term struggles, whether in terms of coping with demonetization or in terms of potentially adjusting to the coming of GST in this climate, or a short-term fall of growth. The fact is that these are realities. But I am optimistic because we are now only thinking, only planning, and only strategizing on the long term with boldness of reform, structurally making economic reform the tool for political interests. Being pro-common man, but not with the burden of doling out appeasements. Modi did not put 50,000 rupees or 1 lakh in the bank accounts of everyone with a Jan Dhan Yojana. He is not trying to buy the votes out. I think this is great if he's taken away appeasement from the process. SOPs, appeasements, subsidies are being kept aside. Now there is a commitment to growth and attractiveness for investors. And the balance for me is the most powerful part of the present India story. So if you were to ask me, I think the last 2.5 years has been a period of settling down. I think without any doubt, we are now poised for large-term growth. We are taking political risks. And we have fair amount of disruptive economic thinking. If Mr. Modi takes this forward for the next 2.5 years, I feel that we are well on our way to a level of growth that my generation would not have anticipated in its time. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.